At our weekend family dinner, my younger sister set her fork down and said, "Starting tomorrow, Tanner and his parents are moving in. If that's a problem, you can move out." I just smiled and nodded. The next morning, 3 moving trucks pulled up my driveway, packed to the ceiling with someone else's furniture. Hours later, when they finally tried to walk through my own front doors, I got a call from my sister in absolute panic. "What the hell did you do?" "My name is Vivian Cross. I'm 39, and I bought my $4.1 million villa in Paradise Valley, outside Scottsdale, with 16 years of my own work in commercial real estate. Every brick of that 5,200 square foot house belongs to me. And yet my 26-year-old sister stood in my dining room and handed my house over to a family of strangers who'd never contributed a single dollar to it. She assumed I'd fold quietly, hand over the keys, and disappear. What was waiting on the other side of that front door when they finally opened it made her drop hers straight onto the marble floor. None of it makes sense unless I start from the beginning, because you have to understand exactly how a woman loses a house she never actually lost. That house was never supposed to sit that empty. A decade before any of this, my father, Julian Cross, had a heart attack that took him before he ever got to retire. That loss put the whole weight of the family on my mother, Carol, while I poured everything I had into building a career in commercial real estate, 16 years of 60-hour weeks, trading almost everything personal for enough capital to finally buy the house we'd always talked about. Life has an ugly sense of timing. The month I closed on that house, my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive illness that took 3 years to finish its work. I spent that stretch running property deals by day and sitting at her bedside by night, trying to buy back time I didn't have. She died in the upstairs bedroom 2 years ago, in a room with mountain views and Italian marble and an emptiness no amount of money could fix. Grieving both parents left me wandering the house like it was a museum instead of a home. That's the state my sister, Paige, found me in when she came back into my life. At 26, she'd never had to face the version of adulthood I built my 20s around. After Mom passed, she told me living alone in her downtown apartment was destroying her, and out of some misplaced instinct to protect her, and honestly, to fill those echoing rooms with something, I invited her to move into the house rent-free. For a few weeks it actually felt good. Then, the way it goes with people who are handed a lifestyle instead of building one, something shifted. Paige started treating the custom kitchen and the pool house like they'd always been hers by right, not something I'd spent 16 years earning. The real fracture started 4 months later, when a man named Tanner Reed showed up. 30 years old, full of unearned confidence, introducing himself that first weekend as a freelance consultant waiting on his big break. In reality, Tanner was expensive taste with no income behind it and a gift for getting other people to pay for his life. Weekend visits became full weeks, and eventually his entire wardrobe moved in without so much as a conversation with me, the actual owner. He never paid a cent toward the property taxes, the utilities, or the groceries. He spent his afternoons by the pool, smoking cigars on the terrace, and quietly working on my sister, convincing her, piece by piece, that my success was a shared family resource rather than something I'd built on my own. I remember the first time I actually tried to draw a line. It was a Sunday morning, maybe 6 weeks after Tanner had settled in for good, and I came downstairs to find 8 people I'd never met sitting around my kitchen island, eating out of containers from a catering company I hadn't ordered from. Tanner explained, waving a mimosa in my direction, that a few of his investor contacts had wanted to see the property before a pitch meeting, and that hosting them here made him look more established. Nobody had asked me. Nobody had warned me. I stood in my own doorway in yesterday's work clothes while strangers admired my mother's old china cabinet like it was a showroom display. I didn't make a scene that morning either. I went back upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and told myself it was a one-time thing, a bad judgment call from someone still figuring out how to be a guest in a house that wasn't his. It wasn't a one-time thing. Within a month, the investor brunches were a bi-weekly fixture, and I'd started timing my errands around them just to avoid walking into my own kitchen full of people I didn't know. 6 months after Tanner moved in, whatever boundaries had existed in that house were gone. What started as small inconveniences became a full takeover of the main living space. I came home from negotiating a commercial lease one evening and felt like an intruder in my own house. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon when I walked into my ground floor office to find a construction crew tearing down my built-in bookshelves and hauling out my filing cabinets to make room for a home theater setup and a pool table. Paige explained, completely unbothered, that Tanner needed a lounge to entertain potential clients, and that my office was wasted square footage. I could work from a corner of my own bedroom. Tanner just smirked from the couch, sipping a whiskey I'd been saving, offering a hollow apology for not texting me before the crew showed up. The real cruelty came 2 weeks later, aimed at our longtime housekeeper, Louisa Ortiz. Louisa had been with our family 18 years, she'd cared for my mother through her final months with more tenderness than most blood relatives manage. When she gently asked Tanner to stop leaving his mess in the kitchen, Paige fired her over a voicemail, without ever telling me. Louisa came to me in tears, playing me the message where my sister accused her of disrespecting the new household. I didn't scream. I quietly gave Louisa 3 years of severance and set up a fully funded retirement annuity in her name. She'd given our family her best years, and I wasn't going to let my sister's decline cost her anything. That same night, I finally confronted Paige directly, sitting her down at the kitchen island where Louisa had worked for 18 years. I asked her, calmly, how she could fire a woman who'd held our mother's hand through chemo over a complaint about dirty dishes. Paige rolled her eyes and told me I was being dramatic, that Louisa had an attitude problem and that the house needed a fresh start now that new people were living in it. I asked her when, exactly, this had become the house instead of my house. She didn't have an answer for that. She just picked up her phone and walked out onto the terrace, leaving me sitting alone at the island in the quiet Louisa used to fill every morning. To protect my own sanity, I made a calculated retreat. I moved my things into the fully self-contained carriage house at the back of the property and let Paige and Tanner run the main house however they wanted, while I quietly watched the trap they were digging for themselves. It was a cold Thursday evening in late November when everything finally came to a head. A storm had rolled through the valley, and Paige invited me over from the carriage house for a family dinner, claiming she wanted to talk things through. Halfway through the meal, she set her wine glass down and announced, without a hint of hesitation, that Tanner's parents, Walt and Donna Reed, had just sold their house down in Tucson and were moving in permanently, taking the second-floor guest suite for their retirement. When I said 4 strangers taking over my private residence wasn't happening, Paige delivered the ultimatum flatly. If I had a problem living with Tanner's family, I was welcome to go rent an apartment somewhere else in the city. I didn't argue. Later that night, walking back to the main house to grab a contract I'd left in the study, I heard voices through the glass doors near the patio. Tanner had his phone on speaker, talking to his mother, with Paige sitting close beside him. Donna was asking whether the groundwork had been laid to get me off the title for good. Tanner explained, calm as anything, that they were putting together paperwork claiming Paige had been quietly contributing to the mortgage for the past year, fabricated bank transfers they planned to backdate, to argue she had an equitable ownership stake under Arizona property law. She just needs a paper trail that looks real, Tanner said, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. A dozen transfers, staggered over 12 months, routed through her account like she'd been paying into the house the whole time. Any judge sees a pattern like that. They start asking why the sister with no name on the deed has been covering expenses for over a year. That's enough to slow down any eviction while we build the rest of the case. Donna asked what would happen if that wasn't enough on its own. Tanner didn't hesitate. If the equitable interest claim moved too slowly, they'd file a restraining order first, built on a story about me showing up at the house drunk and threatening Paige, something dramatic enough that a judge would grant a temporary order without much scrutiny. That alone would keep me off the property for weeks while the rest of the paperwork worked its way through the system. Paige, sitting close beside him the whole time, didn't say a single word to stop any of it. Standing in the cold outside that window, whatever hurt I'd been carrying evaporated into something a lot colder and clearer. I didn't walk in. I didn't confront them. I went back to the carriage house, opened my laptop, and pulled up the full legal file on the property. Trying to reason with people building a fraud case against me wasn't a strategy. The only real move was to make the house itself disappear from the board entirely. Before sunrise the next morning, I met with my attorney, Marcus Bell, downtown. He'd handled every one of my corporate deals for over a decade. He confirmed what I already knew: Paige had never signed a lease, never paid rent, never contributed a cent toward the purchase. She had no legal claim to anything, real or fabricated, that would survive scrutiny. But a standard eviction would take months and give them time to build their fake paper trail. I told Marcus I wanted something faster. Through my own commercial network, I reached out to a regional real estate group that had been trying to acquire luxury parcels in Paradise Valley for a boutique retreat conversion. I'd sat across the table from their acquisitions director, a sharp woman named Renata Ellis, on 2 other deals over the years, and I knew she moved fast when the numbers made sense. I called her directly instead of routing it through a broker, told her I wanted a clean, all-cash close within the week, and that I'd take a number under market value in exchange for speed and discretion. She didn't ask why. In this business, nobody ever does. Within 48 hours, we'd negotiated a full cash sale, no mortgage contingencies, no delay, with the buyer taking the property as is and assuming full responsibility for securing possession once the deed recorded. Marcus handled every page of the closing personally, working through 2 nights to make sure nothing in the paperwork gave Paige or Tanner an opening to contest the transfer later. By Friday afternoon, The wire had cleared and the deed was recorded at the county office, and not one person still living in that house had the slightest idea it had happened. The moment the funds cleared, my first move was making sure the one person who'd actually earned loyalty was taken care of. I used part of the proceeds to buy Louisa a 2-bedroom condo downtown, outright, in her name. Watching her cry when I handed her the keys was worth more to me than anything that happened after. Marcus finalized the closing and sent a formal notice to the residents. The property had changed ownership entirely, and all current occupants had a deadline to vacate. 2 days later, a courier delivered the notice. Tanner answered the door and signed for it without fully registering what he was holding. Convinced I was bluffing, he hid the letter in a desk drawer without telling Paige or his parents, certain no court would ever actually enforce eviction against family. While he sat on that letter, Paige and Tanner kept planning, picking finishes for the guest suite, planning a welcome dinner for his parents, completely unaware the clock had already run out. On a snow-dusted Tuesday morning in mid-December, 3 moving trucks from Tucson pulled up the long driveway. Walt and Donna stepped out bundled in coats, grinning at the size of the house, having sold everything they owned to make this move. Tanner walked down the front steps, waving the movers toward the entrance like he owned the place. The front doors swung open, and the celebration stopped cold. Standing in the foyer wasn't a welcome party. It was a line of corporate representatives, Marcus at the center with a leather portfolio, standing beside the buyer's senior asset manager. 2 uniformed officers stood near the staircase to keep things orderly. Behind them, a locksmith crew waited with new keypads and security seals. Donna froze in the doorway, her smile collapsing into confusion. Tanner's face went white the second he clocked the badges. Paige came rushing down the stairs in her robe just in time to hear Marcus explain, calmly, that the property had been sold in full and that the corporation now holding the deed was the sole legal owner. Her keyring slipped out of her hand and hit the marble floor. Marcus gave them 60 minutes to gather personal items. Anything left behind would be handled by the new owner. Anyone who stayed past the deadline would be treated as trespassing under state law. Walt started shouting questions nobody could answer, demanding to know where his son's financial arrangements had gone, as if Tanner had ever had any to begin with. Donna clung to his arm, hyperventilating, asking over and over where they were supposed to take 3 trucks full of a lifetime's belongings on a Tuesday morning with nowhere booked to go. Tanner finally found his voice, turning on Paige in front of everyone. "You told me she'd never actually go through with it," he said, his composure completely gone. "You said she'd cave the second we brought my parents into it." Paige just stared at him, then at the folder in Marcus's hands, then at me standing quietly by the side entrance. She didn't say anything back to him. I don't think there was anything left for her to say. I stood near the side entrance the whole time, coat on, bags already in my car. I walked over, picked Paige's keyring up off the floor, and set it gently in the asset manager's hand. I looked at her and Tanner one last time, no anger left in it, just closure, and walked out to my car without another word. As I pulled out of the driveway, my phone lit up on the dashboard with Paige's name. I answered just in time to hear her screaming into the line. "What the hell did you do?" 18 months later, the fallout had settled into something permanent. Walt and Donna, having already sold their home in Tucson, ended up stuck in a cramped, overpriced rental on the far edge of the city, their retirement savings gutted by the move that never worked out. The stress tore at their marriage in ways money alone couldn't fix. Tanner's plan to secure himself a luxury estate ended up costing his own family everything they had left. He and Paige didn't survive it either. He blamed her for not securing any real claim to the house. She blamed him for sitting on the eviction notice and letting the whole thing blow up in their faces. Their fights turned into actual legal disputes over shared debt, and the relationship ended in exactly the kind of bitterness they'd tried to build for me. For the first time in her life, Paige had to face real adulthood without a financial safety net behind her. I changed my number and cut off every way she could reach me. She ended up working retail to cover rent on a studio apartment, learning, the hard way, the value of money she'd spent years treating as automatic. The buyer converted the estate into a corporate retreat center, repurposing the floor plan for business use, entirely detached from whatever drama had once filled its halls. With the proceeds from the sale, I expanded my portfolio into new markets and moved into a high-rise penthouse downtown, finally settling into the kind of peace I hadn't had in years. Louisa lives nearby in her own condo, and we still have dinner most weekends, remembering my mother without any of the bitterness attached to the rest of it. Some Sunday mornings, I still catch myself listening for the sound of the pool filter kicking on, or the smell of the fireplace from the main house, before I remember I traded all of it for a view of the city instead of the mountains. I don't regret the trade. I just notice it, the way you notice any room that used to be full of people and isn't anymore. Renata called me a few months after the sale to let me know the retreat center had its first corporate group booked in for a leadership offsite, a few dozen strangers sleeping in the rooms where my mother spent her last years, running strategy sessions in the space that used to be my father's study. I thought it might sting more than it did. Mostly it just felt like proof that a house is only ever as sentimental as the people living in it, and I'd rather it belong to strangers than to people who thought loyalty was optional. Paige reached out once, almost a year later, through a mutual friend, asking if I'd be willing to just talk. No money involved, nothing about the house. I thought about it for a few days. I didn't say no because I was still angry. I said no because I finally understood that the version of her I'd been protecting for years, the version I thought would show up if I just gave her enough room, was never actually going to show up on her own. Some people only meet you halfway once there's nothing left to take. What I took away from all of it is simple. People who try to exploit someone else's generosity are usually the ones who end up building their own downfall. Holding your ground, even when it costs you a relationship, is what actually buys you peace in the long run.